right. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Appleton Museum of Art. My name is Miss Deborah, and today we are going to do a painting, and it's going to feature an elephant. This week, all of our pieces will have an animal of sorts that we'll be featuring. The reason that I chose the elephant, besides the fact they're just amazingly cool animals, is here at the Appleton, when you drive up, we have this amazing reflection pond. And at the front end of it, towards the museum, there are 3 of the cutest elephant sculptures there. So the painting that we're going to do today, here is a sample of it. It is a silhouette painting. So whenever you see something such as a sunrise or sunset, the light is very intense behind the subjects. The subjects themselves are going to appear just basically black, and it makes for a very striking painting. We're also going to be practicing this technique. Kind of a new word that I hear is ombre, going from dark to light, or a gradient painting. So we'll practice getting that effect. It happens very quickly. So if you're not pleased with your very first one, that's okay. Remember, we're practicing things. We're learning new skills. We're building our skill set. Here's a good example of it just with the background. I also have included, if you were able to print, a couple black images of an elephant. And what I'm going to do is just cut out this shape and then glue it onto the surface very carefully. There's a couple of them, so if you want to choose which direction your elephant goes in, or if it's an adult or an infant elephant, you'll have some choices there. Now, if you don't have these, no big deal. We can easily draw just a basic outline of the elephant and fill it in all black. So you can either paint that, or you can even use marker to achieve that. I'll put those on the side there. So basically, we're only going to be using 3 colors to create the painting: red, yellow, and black. And although there is a fair amount of orange in the painting, of course, we don't really need orange because we can create that ourselves with red and yellow. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to tape my paper down with a border all the way around. Not only does it give a very nice finished product, but that'll keep paint from dripping off the side there. And if you frame your painting, you'll not lose part of the painting when you frame it around the edge. We call it a border, a frame of reference, to keep it all in the center. So just like we did the other day, I have my tape and my paper. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to switch this camera around so you'll be able to see best. There we go. All right. So I have a tray that I'm going to tape this down on. You don't have to use a tray. Of course, a piece of paper will work just fine. But as you remember, there's a little bit of a trick to putting this tape down on the paper so that it doesn't just tear up my paper. And that is, I'm going to take the tape, and you're not going to be able to see this, but underneath here, I'm dabbing it on my leg to pick up lint from my apron. As I don't want it to be this sticky. Yep, you can see the lint on there now. So I'm going to use this. I'm coming in, maybe a half an inch or so. I'm not pressing real hard. I don't want it to stay there, but I don't want the paint to seep under the edge if I can help it. And do a little dabbing. Who knew this would be such a good technique? One more piece and then we'll be ready to get some paint. So this painting actually is featured in a savanna. I know when I was growing up, and it's still a common saying, like the king of the jungle. Well, it's really savanna, and the vegetation is very different there than in a jungle. Okay, so as I mentioned, we are only going to use 3 different colors, and right now I'm only using red and yellow for the background. And what I'm going to do is dab some paint directly on my paper. So this is kind of a guesswork here. We want to have enough paint to cover the whole surface in at one go. We don't want to add it more if we can help it. But of course, we don't want it to be way too much either. So I think of it in terms of like maybe a dime size. By far and away, red is the most saturated color. It's our darkest, strongest color. So we're only going to use a couple 3 dots of that and then use more yellow. When I get going on the painting, I'm going to start at the bottom and work up about a third of the way with yellow so that I'm able to preserve. So I'm able to keep some of that nice bright yellow. Then I'm going to come back to the top of the painting and with quick, wide brush strokes, work that red into orange, work it back and forth a little bit, and then continue to get a little bit lighter as I come down into the yellow. If you notice some streaking in your painting with the colors, that's fine. It actually looks better that way. It looks more realistic. All right, so as I mentioned, I'm going to have 3 dabs. Of red, probably more than enough. And twice as much of the yellow. So I'm going to start down at the bottom. I have the tape on the paper, so it's going to protect my edge there. Okay, that's about a third. Now back up to the red. You can see I have the same brush. There's a little bit of yellow in there, but that's okay. I'm going to come down and start picking up this yellow paint now. When I'm working on the edges of the painting, I am trying to pull my brush into the painting there, not pushing the paint under the tape. I just use the same brush. I don't want a whole lot of water in this. And that way I can continue to blend these colors so that I'm going from the red to orange. I want to get some orange in there. So I did not rinse my brush out at all. I like that streak of yellow up there. So I'm going to try to preserve that. I'm going to try to leave that in there.
So we'll think of this as the sunrise or sunset. I kind of think of it more as a sunrise. And I am trying to make sure that my strokes go all across the page once I have it established. I think that I could use just a little bit more yellow. It looks awfully just plain dark red up there. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more. Oh yeah, I think that's going to be better. I did try to make sure that the paint wasn't terribly thick because of course it's going to have to dry. I know the next color that I'm going to use is going to be yellow. So I'm going to go ahead and take whatever paint I can, that red paint, out of my brush. So as you're looking at your painting now, we'll want to decide, where am I going to put the sun? I'm going to go ahead and put that in while the paint is still wet so it blends in a little bit. And basically, I'm just going to use my larger brush and I'm going to make a circle, just a round about. It doesn't have to be perfect or anything. The sun's coming up. It's really, really a hot, dry day. Sometimes even you might see where it's so hot that you can almost see it a little wavy in the air. And that will help us create this hot illusion. We have all warm colors here. So decide where you're going to have your sun. A little bit of yellow paint. A light orange. Yeah, I think that's okay. What you can do, I'm having that same thing. I've established where my sun's going to be, and it is still, because the paint's so wet, we can come back and add a little bit more yellow there. Now that you know where it's going to be, you have it established, it'll give us a chance. It needs a chance for the paint to dry a little bit. And then I think that you'll get a second layer on there, and that'll give you a little bit more of a yellow sun. Unless, of course, you like that shade of orange, and then it's good to go. Okay, I'm just going to leave that for a little bit. So while that is drying there, because we're going to need this to dry a little bit before we're able to go on and add the black paint over it. We don't want the black to get blended in with our background colors. So while I'm waiting, I have a couple elephants here that I had printed out, and I'm going to go ahead and cut one out so that I'm allowing my paint to dry, but I'm staying busy getting ready for the next stage. it is an umbrella thorn acacia tree. I looked it up. There are definitely on the savanna some very specific types of trees. I am going to, this still needs to dry. It's pretty dry down here, but I see wet spots. And if I were to drag black paint through that, it is absolutely going to just smear. So I'm going to set that aside, give myself a little work space here. And I'm going to just use this background. Now, unfortunately, I don't have a nice crisp border on there, which I just think looks so nice, but that's okay. Okay, so I noticed I did not get my sun in here, so I'm going to get that in right away before I take this brush and set it aside. I'm just going to make a nice circle with my brush. This wide brush makes for a very easy circle. And it just happens to be about the right size for my painting. If I wanted it to be smaller, of course, I could use a smaller brush. And then I'm going to just use solid black to put in the foreground, add some of those grasses, savanna grasses, and my acacia tree before I glue down the elephant. And again, if you are drawing your elephant or painting your elephant in, you can do that whenever you're comfortable. Okay, I have here just a plastic lid that I'm going to be using for my black paint. So I have like a little mini palette here. I need a different size brush. So I'm going to have a couple different brushes to choose from that I'll put out. One of the brushes I'd like to make sure has a nice flat edge on it. This is just like probably a 1/4 inch flat. I want that flat edge because that's what I'm going to use to create the silhouette of the leaves on the acacia tree. Maybe something a little bit broader to put in the foreground here. All right, so to get started, I'm just going to use about, let's say, 2 inches, maybe, yeah, about 2 inches. And I'm going to just paint it black. The savanna is typically just a very, very flat, dry land, and it has grasses. So I'm putting in a sparse black. There's a little bit of it's not a ruler straight line because, I mean, it's the ground. So now I'm going to use the edge of my brush, and I'm going to focus on taking some of this excess paint out of my brush, and grass grows from the ground up. So now I'm going to take this brush on the flat edge, and with a quick motion, I'm coming from the ground up to create some grasses. As my brush goes to the top of the grass, I'm lifting up on it a little bit. The important thing is that you keep your strokes going in the direction that the grass is growing. And basically, I'm going to work back and forth across the page to create the silhouette of the ground. So I'll have very little that's left just plain flat. Okay, I've got some grass in here. It's time for me to move along so that I can get a tree in. So basically, the acacia trees have a very broad canopy. The top is very broad in comparison to the limbs and the trunk. As you can see here, it has just a pretty simple single trunk. You might be able to see these aren't real straight lines, so we don't have to worry about that. It's a tree, it's organic, it's natural. And then break out into a few of the branches. Once we get that established, we'll come back and bring in some of the leaves. So I'm just going to use a pencil to just barely. I have my elephant here. I know he's going to be probably right about there. My tree right about here. So really, all I need to do is to put a line that's very light. Here, let me try to darken that a little bit there. I just need a line so that I remember where it's going to go. I'm going to thicken that up with paint. I don't really need to draw this tree because I'm going to paint it. And I'll think about a couple branches coming off from it. I can always add some more. Then I'm going to use the round brush. I need a tiny bit of water with this paint, I'm discovering. And anything like when you're mixing colors or adding water, a little bit is what you start with, a little bit, because you can always add more. Now my tree, again, it seems kind of simple, but it grows from the ground. So we want to start at the base and to bring it up from there. Also, most trees are wider at the bottom and then go in ever so slightly here before we start breaking off into branches. I'm putting a little bit of a weave, just a little personality on my line. So I'm not worried that it's not perfectly straight. I don't want it to be straight. As I come to the end of the branch, I'm lifting up I'm lifting my hand up ever so slightly so that it gets thinner. Just going to have a few branches here. I can always come back and add more. And remember, it's going to be the leaves that are really going to fill this in. Especially when I'm using such fine lines, I need that little bit of water in my brush so that the paint is flowing off the brush. Okay, I have my lone tree established here. That round brush worked perfect for that. If you don't like the way it looks right now, remember, I hope that you take the opportunity to come back and to do this again. Okay, so I have my flat brush now. This is just like a 1/4 inch, maybe a 1/2 inch flat. A little dab of paint. I'm using my brush straight up and down now. And I have room over here. You can see I'm practicing. I want to make sure that I'm not going to get globs of paint. And the paint that I'm using from my palette is really just this little bit of leftover here. I'm not scooping up any paint. I don't want to scoop up paint right now. And then I'm going to use my brush straight up and down. When I paint, it's going to be straight up and down. And basically, I'm dabbing in the leaves. So I'm just going to work around the whole area to establish start of my leaves. And then I'm going to come back and build it up. So I'm not going to finish one area before I move on to the next. Now, before I even did this tree, I looked it up on the internet to see what they look like. Because, of course, we don't have these trees here. And I wanted it to be realistic so that people would identify it as a tree that resides on the savanna. And that's something I would encourage you if you are doing any subject matter that you're not really familiar with. Look it up, explore it a little bit. Now it's really nice that I can still see my sky, my sunrise through these leaves. I'm going to show you that if you have an elephant silhouette, or if you want to draw one, once that is glued down on the surface, then you have a really nice focal point there. Another thing that you can add as a final touch, and this I'm going to take my little damper brush with just a tiniest bit of paint. I want it just on the very tip of my brush. And I'm going to make, let's see here, what's that like? It's like an M that's real pulled out long. And I can add the shadow of a bird. There, can you see? There you go. So tiny, because not only are birds much tinier than an elephant, but these are far away. So we want them to be very small. Now I'm going to go ahead and glue my elephant down later. I've finished off the edges so I don't have any glaring white. And when I glue him down, then he will look like the rest of the painting here. I painted the tree, but I glued down the elephant. Because guess what? We have another project to do today. So we can always come back and finish these at another time. I'm going to set that aside right now so that I can get some pieces for our mono print. Again, the subject that we're using is going to be an eagle, but again, you can do whatever animal that you want. I would encourage you probably to follow along with me today. And then another day, try the technique again. All right. So I'll talk to you while you're getting the rest of your supplies ready. And remember that if you do not have exactly what I have, that's okay. We're going to make do with what we have and be creative to make it work. Styrofoam plate. So it's not a paper plate, it's a styrofoam plate. You could always use sometimes vegetables and stuff also come on styrofoam plates. I don't need all of this outside edge. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that off. I'm going to try to keep as much of the flat round part as I can. All right, so I have a flat circle that I've cut styrofoam plate. I'm going to use a 4x4. This is a 4x4 cardboard. This is just a template. This is the size that I've determined is the biggest that I can keep, that I can make my eagle and keep it on the inside of that styrofoam plate. So that's why I came up with this size. If the plate was bigger, I would want to use as much of the space as I could. I would make my template bigger. But right now, I know that this 4x4 is just about the right size. So what I need to do is to establish my eagle drawing. If you were able to print out, I sent a template that basically gives 4 steps on creating your eagle. We simplified this so that you could have just simple lines for your monoprint. Now, here's one of the important things. Just like we had a frame of reference on our silhouette painting, I want you to think about having a frame of reference come in around the border. The reason for that is because you want to have space to create these half circles to make it look like a stamp. I have a piece of paper here that we can practice drawing the eagle. Before I do that, I'm just going to show you quick so I can set these aside. These were the first prints that I pulled. These were just practice. It's called an artist proof. I was just practicing. So too much ink, not enough ink. This one I thought was just about right. Once I kind of determined that, then I would go back and I made 4 prints. This I just happened to make 4 because it filled up the whole page and I wanted to practice it. You don't have to do it like this. I think if I had 3 prints across long ways, that would also look really neat. So I'll set those aside for right now. And if you need to see them again, we'll come back to that. So I'm using this 4x4 template because I know that is the size that will fill my paper plate, will fill the surface for my print. I'm using the marker so that you can see it. If I were doing this, I would use pencil because some of these lines I'm going to want to erase. As I mentioned, I'm going to come in and I'm going to put a little border in right away with my pencil. Now, like I said, I'm going to go ahead and do this in marker so you can see. But I would lightly go in and divide my paper into fourths. And I'm going to go ahead and start sketching my eagle. Now, I'm using marker here, which I would not normally do. I would still do it in pencil. But I want you to be able to see. We'll see how this turns out. So this is just basically the head of the eagle. I can put his shoulders in here. So then I have the head established. Now I'm going to come back and bring a beak in. The beak is going to come all the way into the first quarter here. So this center line, that beak comes all the way and almost totally fills this whole space. Also, it is almost entirely in the first square. It comes a little bit down to create the hook beak, but otherwise it's almost entirely in that area. The drawing itself, if I have some lines here, of course, I would erase those if I were drawing it in pencil so that I didn't get confused. But it doesn't matter because we're not going to be using this for anything else other than a pattern to trace from. So I have a beak established and an eye. So I'm just going to have a nice circle and a circle in the middle. And it's the eyebrow that adds all of the personality of the eagle. So we want him to look a little fierce. The last thing that I'm going to do, because I have my basic eagle established here, is I'm going from the very outside line of the template, I'm going to add little half circles. They're not touching. There's a space in between here. So each circle, half circle, there's a space in between there. Stamps don't always necessarily look like that now, but this would look like a perforation in an older style stamp. And most of the time people would recognize that, oh yeah, that looks like a stamp. Okay, so there's my quick drawing. Yes, he has that eagle look to him. If these lines bother you, you can erase them, but you don't need to. In the drawing here, I tried to make sure that it was all cleaned up so that you could see just the drawing. Right now, we're going to take the circle, styrofoam circle, And using a sharp object, like it could be a pencil, a pen would work, the sharp end of a paintbrush could work. And so you could see it a little bit better. I have this tool right here. Even a toothpick will work. That's kind of small, but we could work with it. But right now, even a pencil will work very well. Just try not to press so hard that you break the lead. Is what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my drawing. I'm going to cut it out. That way I can position it in the center of the plate. I want to make sure that I use the spaces the best that I can. So when I put that down there, I'm going to use this tool to press along the drawing lines. So what I'm going to end up with is an indentation, an impression in the styrofoam plate. So I'm going to take a styrofoam plate. I've positioned it on here. I'm going to use my tool to make impressions into the styrofoam. I don't need to tear the paper. As a matter of fact, the first thing I'm going to do is to make the outline. So when we print, the ink or the paint is not going to go into these crevices, into the indentation. We want it to stay just on the flat surfaces. If I were to lift this paper off, yes, you can see the outline anyway. So you can see the outline of the paper, and I'm going over the half circles right now. And I want to try to be careful to keep a solid line, because if I start doing sketchy marks, it's going to show up on my styrofoam plate and it's going to show up on my print. Now, you might have noticed right there, I was feeling. Did I do that line? Yes, I did that line. No, I did not do this line. So this is my final line. Okay, I have traced the image onto the styrofoam plate. I can see there might be a few areas that I'm just going to gently come back and make sure that that impression is a good, strong impression. This I know is harder for y'all to see. I don't know if I can make this so you can see it yet, but I'm going to add some, I'm going to roll my brayer over it in just a minute, and then you'll be able to see it. Okay, so in the instructions, I talked about using even just a hard cardboard tube, which the tube that I'm going to use is actually the same one that I used on Monday to roll out my clay. If I want to darken, to deepen any of these lines, I can do that after I get some after I get my print going, I'll be able to see if they need to be a little bit deeper. And next, I'm going to cut off the outside edge because I don't need that. And I know that is going to print just a flat surface, and that's going to distract from my eagle. Now, a brayer. This is a regular brayer. It's just kind of like a little rolling pin, but this is not as hard as a rolling pin. But here at the museum, if we were doing this just happens to be about the right size too. I would use this to spread out my paint or my ink, and then to spread it over the surface. What that will do, a couple things, is it's going to make it very even. It's going to distribute the paint or printing material evenly, the ink, and it is not going to be thick because I don't want it to go in these grooves. I want the grooves to remain white. So when I print, you can see that the drawing's going to be like a reverse drawing. It's going to have white lines in it. That is how these lines were achieved. So I'm not going to use that brayer. This is the tube that I used to roll out my clay owl. Now this tube is really hard. So what I did is I took some plastic wrap and I just put a little bit over it. Two reasons. One, it's not quite as hard. And two, I can take it off and it doesn't ruin this tube, because this tube is a great tube to roll out clay with. And I want to save it for that. But I can also use it to roll out my paint. So let's give it a try. Okay, so I have my brayer, my roller. I put out a little bit of paint here. I didn't just blob it in one spot. I spread it out a little bit because it's important that we get, that we distribute this paint equally over the surface. So I'm going to roll this out a little bit and try to make sure that the paint is even on my brayer. So that's pretty good. And it's wide enough for the plate itself. It covers the entire eagle. All right, here we go. The great reveal. I'm going to start at one end. I'm not pressing down very hard, very lightly, going over it. Ooh, it looks like I'm filling in my lines. I might have too much paint. That's why I'm going to do an artist proof. I have a piece of paper here. I'm going to put the paper directly onto the surface of my plate and gently rub. I can see the outline through the paper. I can see that paint. Voila. These are called monoprints because I pull one print at a time here. So it looks like I have really just too much paint. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to rub this one more time. I'm going to try to get some of that paint off. And then I know I need to go back and roll that paint out even more. I need a thinner layer. Okay, it's starting. I can see, I need to look to see. I might have a few areas that I actually need to go back with my sharp tool and make sure that the line when I was working with just the white, it was a little harder to see. But now I can see it a little bit better. So what we're doing here is we're getting the plate ready. We're starting to see that first one, the paint was just kind of splotchy. Well, that was working the plate so that it would take the paint evenly as I got it more evenly distributed on the brayer. All right, I think we got some of these lines now a little better. I'm being careful. I don't want to go through the plate, but I want to make sure that the indentation is really deep enough that the paint won't settle in it. Another thing I'll point out just quick is you might notice that when you pull your print, it actually is reversed from the way that you did your drawing. Now, in most cases, that probably won't matter, but if it does, you need to flip the image so that it will actually pull off the plate in the direction that you want it. Where that's really critical is if you were to do a word. If you were to write a word, you'd have to write the word backwards in order for it to print correctly. Okay, let's try it again. So oftentimes when an artist is working this way, they may pull 1 or 2 or 10 artist proofs before it starts showing up more in the fashion that they're looking for it to. Still not wild about this. I'm pressing all over the surface, but not overly hard, not pressing too much on it. Okay, that one's starting to come out a little bit better. What I'm seeing is a lot of the plastic wrap, which on the sample, I did do that before, but somehow it's a little bit different. It could be that the paint is different. Let's just see how this works. So we'll see how the brayer, if that's something, maybe I didn't smooth out my cellophane or the plastic wrap enough. Okay, now I'm starting to get a little bit better definition of the lines. Little weak over here. I probably didn't rub that area right there well enough. Let's try it again. I'm going to add just a little bit more paint. And when I do that, now I'm going to need to make sure that I roll it out so it's an even distribution of paint. I don't want any blobs on there. That's going to defeat the purpose. And it's just a lot of fun to pull it off and see, whoa, it's kind of like a little bit of magic. Now I have something going on right here. I'm not sure what, I can't really see it. Maybe when I was doing the drawing, I pressed down too hard right there and caused a problem on the plate. I didn't see it at first, but the last couple ones, I see it coming up. Well, I would say that you have another skill, another form of art that it would be wonderful for you to explore and to experiment and to try different images, maybe try different colors. You can even try different shapes. It doesn't have to be a square. Okay, I'm going to do it one more time. And then later, I'm going to try it with a toilet paper roll. As that turned out so good. I'm going to just add a little bit of extra pressure there on the eye. Nope, it still is a little weird right there. Well, that's how we learn. So what I can do is go back, create another plate. I have an image. I did not destroy the image that I drew. So if I wanted to, I could go back and try it again. Trace it again onto a little piece of styrofoam and see what I might have done right there. The only thing I can figure is because it looks like a fingerprint, is that I pressed too hard right there and that left a mark in my plate. But you have done an amazing job and you've been such a good audience and really good listening on a technique that you probably have never tried this before. There is a tremendous amount of different kinds of printmaking. And as you become more experienced in art and take different art classes, you are already on the road to trying different kinds of prints. Bye, everyone. I'm Miss Deborah, and we are at the Appleton Museum of Art in Ocala, Florida.